The DLC for the Resident Evil 4 remake has been released to market on all major platforms, and I've already completed it 3 times, once on hardcore mode and twice more on professional mode. I've also earned all of the achievements, wrapping up the full list for the game, having already earned all of the achievements for the main game months ago. This DLC follows the same premise as the former Separate Ways add-on from the original game. Ada Wong has arrived in Spain with her own objective, as her story takes place parallel alongside Leon's in the main story, clocking in at around 5 hours in length if played in a normal manner. This is plenty of content for this story expansion. There's also some additions to the Mercenaries mode, which includes 2 different versions of Ada Wong, and the inclusion of series villain Albert Wesker along with a new map labeled The Docks. Having not played the original Separate Ways, I don't have much to compare that to this, but it's very clear that Capcom intended to use this DLC to make up for some notable exclusions from the main game. As far as Separate Ways goes, I thought it was decent. Not fantastic, not dreadful, just decent. The entire DLC is a straightforward line to your overall objective. There's a few large areas that you venture through, but for the most part, there's a strict path that the game forces you to follow. There's numerous locations from Leon's campaign that you revisit as Ada. Many of these areas that exist in the main game are streamlined with separate paths that are blocked off, preventing further exploration, which is to be expected in supplemental content such as this. Many of the same enemy units from the main game return here in their various forms. There wasn't a single new enemy type that was introduced here, nor was there any new mechanics that was introduced. The developers gave Ada a gun that acts as a grappling hook. However, this mechanic behaves exactly the same as it did when the character was playable in Resident Evil 6. With it mostly being used to reach high areas that otherwise would be inaccessible. You can also use it here and there to reach enemies from a distance for a melee attack, but that's not its primary use. There's a new weapon that's been added, which is the crossbow that Ada had in other games that makes a return here. Many of the other weapons from the main game with Leon can be utilized here as well. There's also the option for an infinite rocket launcher upgrade, but considering the fact that it costs well over $1 million in-game currency, and considering that the DLC is rather short, there's absolutely no point in pursuing it. The thing here that's most noticeable about this DLC are the set pieces and a specific boss character that finally have been added to the game. These things include the gondola gunfight, the laser wall QTE sequence, and the boss known as U3 going by a different name in the remake, each return here. These things, however, largely return in different versions than what was in the original game. The main addition, being the U3 boss, has been toned down significantly to a small area that you can run around in, with a second phase in which you fight the tail that has separated itself from the main body and has become a centipede-like creature. The U3 boss in the original game was far more epic and larger in scale with regards to context than what's presented in the remake version. This is a moment where clearly the original game did a better job than the remake. But then there's the laser wall section, which only uses one button for the QTEs and presents a new enemy not seen in the original that Ada must flee from. Despite that sequence being so short, it fits with the more realistic tone of the remake, and it's more engaging than what was in the original. Basically, there are things that the original does better than the remake, and vice versa. There are still missing areas in the original that don't make an appearance in the DLC, but with the release of this DLC, most of the original Resident Evil 4 is in the remake, either in the main game or in different versions contained within Separate Ways. If anything, it's rather disappointing that there's not more new elements. Aside from this new detective eye thing that Ada was given, which is entirely scripted, there's 0 new notable mechanics. There's also no new weapons to use. There's no new enemy units. It's a very straightforward and predictable experience, which is a problem. A DLC should introduce new elements, and this felt more like Capcom making up for things that were removed from the main game itself. All in all, Separate Ways is just okay. It's not the fantastic DLC add-on that the reviews have made it out to be. Then there's the additions to Mercenaries mode. As I mentioned before, Ada Wong and Albert Wesker were added as playable characters along with a new map. To summarize quickly, both Ada and Albert are fun characters to use. Wesker is a bit more interesting since they gave him some powered attacks that's reminiscent of his abilities in Resident Evil 5, but for the most part, they're fun additions to the mode. The new map, however, I didn't care for. It's a shooting gallery like the other stages, but on steroids. There's too many enemies that flood the screen, and you quickly become overrun. It gets worse when the chainsaw zombies pop up and their speed is increased drastically over what they were in either the main game or the Separate Ways DLC. It's just not fun after the first few minutes. The problem with Mercenaries mode in this game is the mode itself. It doesn't have the staying power or the depth that Mercenaries mode has in Resident Evil Village, which did the mode far better than what's in the remake version. So after you've played a few stages with Ada and Wesker, it gets old very fast because the mode itself just doesn't have the amount of depth that it should have. So between the Mercenaries editions and Separate Ways, they both will keep you engaged for around 20 hours at the max, and that's if you choose to go back and replay Separate Ways for all of the achievements. That's if you put some extended time in the Mercenaries mode. Overall, it's okay supplemental content, but nothing truly new that changes the core structure of the game.